In this video, I'm going to show you why many of the things you thought about renting a home are probably wrong. To prove it, we'll walk through this rent versus buy calculator that I've built. And best of all, by the end of this video, you'll actually be able to download a copy for yourself to play around with, all completely for free. After finding most of the rent versus buy calculators online to be missing some very important information, I thought, what the heck, maybe I'll try and build one. And this includes everything from being able to calculate all of your mortgage info to even accounting for the ability to rent out a portion of your home. At the end of the day, my hope is that this will give you a much clearer and more realistic answer to the question, what's best for me? Should I rent or buy a home, financially speaking? And the answer to that question, I think, might surprise you. You know, many people seem to think that renting a home is the equivalent of just throwing money away. They think you need to own property as soon as possible in life, even if you're not ready for that type of commitment. Well, I'm here to tell you that in a lot of cases, that's not actually true. While owning property can certainly be a good financial decision, sometimes it's actually more expensive than renting is. Now I know that might sound crazy, but I have the receipts. I'll show you. So if you want to follow along with me, you can find a link to my Google Sheets file down below. And then once you open it up, all you'll need to do is click on File and then make a copy to make your own copy to play around with. By the way, while you're down there in the description box, I also wanted to draw your attention to a special sale that I'm running on my course. While I definitely love giving away as much as possible for free, this course is a special comprehensive resource that I've created, which I think is worth much more than the sticker price, especially on sale. If you're new to the channel and need a little bit of context on the course, well, first of all, I would check out the reviews. As you can see, it's pretty highly rated and I'm pretty proud of that. But really, this course is essentially the personal finance class that you should have received in school but didn't. So if you want to get your finances together all in one simple place and you don't really know where to start, all while also learning about this really cool philosophy called financial independence, I think it could be right for you. And of course, if you buy it and decide, hey, this isn't right for me, well, no problem, because you can just get a refund. So you can find a link to that sale down below. I really hope it benefits you. And now let us embark upon an epic but treacherous voyage through the lands of the rent versus buy debate. So here's how to use the calculator. On the left-hand side, you can see a series of green cells. These are the only areas that you will input values into the spreadsheet, and everything else here is going to populate as a result. And the coolest part here is over on the right-hand side, in this green cell, this is where it's ultimately going to tell you whether renting or buying is going to cost you more money, which is pretty neat if I do say so myself, and I think I can say so myself because I spent a lot of time on this. So let's go through this with my own city, Toronto, as an example. And I thought I would use a hypothetical young family who's trying to decide whether it's better to rent or buy a place to live. I think this is probably going to be the best way to illustrate how and why this calculator works the way it does. But don't worry if you're not living here or if you're in a completely different country. This spreadsheet should be flexible enough to accommodate a pretty good range of countries and locations. As you can see, there's even specific areas where you can enter the jurisdiction that you're from. So because we're looking at the Toronto area, I'm going to enter an after-tax household income of $15,000. This couple is going to be doing pretty well for themselves, which you kind of have to be if you're looking to buy in this area. But I mean, if your income is quite far off from that, don't worry about that at all. That's completely normal. Just remember, this is an example to illustrate a point, which you will see shortly. So next, we're going to enter the purchase price of the home that we are considering buying. Now, the key here, this is very important. To make this comparison as effective as possible is we want to compare a similar home to a similar rental situation. So I'm going to put $1.2 million here as the purchase price for this home, as that's probably around what you could find a small 2-bedroom bungalow for here. Yep, just a casual 1.2 mil for a Hobbit-sized home. No crisis here. everything's just fine. Next, I'll put the down payment at 20% as you'd be required to on this property. And then you can see it's actually going to auto calculate your down payment dollar value as well as the total mortgage amount you would need for this property. Then I'm going to put in 5% as the mortgage rate, as that's about what you can do for a fixed rate at the moment, but it seems likely that these rates are going to be heading higher as the year progresses, so keep that in mind. And I'll also put 25 years as the mortgage term, at which point you can see it's actually going to auto-calculate here your monthly mortgage payment. Now, finally for this section, I think it's very important we put in how long we are assuming we would actually live in this home before selling it. So I'm going to put in 10 years, as I think this home would be more of a starter home as opposed to a forever home. Sweet. So moving on to the next section, this section is very important, and that's because in this section we're going to find all the costs that are related to home ownership, and these costs are special, and that's because they are what are known as unrecoverable costs. If you watch my last rent versus buy video, which ended up actually being quite popular, you'll remember I focused on these costs a lot. That's because these costs are basically the rent of your home. They are expenses. They are not investments, which means that when you pay this money for these things, you get no asset or value in return from them. It's just sunk money. This is the exact same thing that paying rent is. So, you know the same people who think that renting is just throwing money away? Well, they're also throwing money away too. They just don't realize it. And sometimes they're actually throwing more money away than they otherwise would be as a renter. You'll see what I mean as we keep going. So for property tax here, this is going to be up to you to get a ballpark idea of what your area pays. But for Toronto, this is 0.61%. Then I'm going to estimate maintenance costs as the standard 1%. And then we have homeowners insurance. This varies pretty widely depending on a bunch of different factors. So I would definitely Google your area here to get the best estimate. And finally, we'll input monthly utilities we estimate for the home in excess of renting. So the point here is basically the utilities you pay as a renter are going to wash out against the homeowner. They're going to net out to zero to a degree, but almost certainly the homeowner is going to pay more utilities than the renter. So here's where we want to account for that extra utility cost you're going to pay as a homeowner. For example, I personally only pay hydro to rent, but if I bought a home, I'd have to pay hydro, gas, and water. So I'm going to estimate an additional $200 of utilities here. Then we get down to the closing costs. This is another cost that I think many people don't initially realize when they're thinking about buying a home. So to buy the home, I'm going to put 4% closing costs, 4% of the value of the home, and then 6% on the sale. Next, we need to estimate the annual rate of appreciation that our home will experience. This is a very important part. So the Toronto market in particular here has been red hot for several years in a row now, way above global historical norms. And it's actually finally starting to slow down as I think the trend has become a bit unsustainable. So for context, global real estate increases on average about 3% per year. Toronto has historically been above that as demand for housing has kind of always exceeded the supply. But over the past year, the average home in Toronto rose about 5% in value. So I'm going to put about that here with an extra 0.5% on top. And as you can see, this gives us an ending home value of just over $2 million, which I think is a bit of a sad sign for the Toronto housing market, given trends of real income are way below that kind of growth. Anyway, that's a whole other can of worms for another day. Next up, we're going to be looking at some tax info. If you happen to be watching from Canada, you get to enter no here because capital gains are not going to apply to your primary residence, your first home, when you go to sell it. But for Americans or anyone else with capital gains on your primary residence, you can enter yes here and then enter your marginal tax rate as well as the capital gains exemption if there is one. For Americans, this is $500,000. And then finally, like I said earlier, I've even built in a little thing to account for if you're going to be turning this into a rental property. So you can either fill out yes yes or no here, and then all the other green boxes, you can fill out the corresponding information that's going to apply to your area and your plans for the property. And that's it for the home buying side. So now we'll turn our attention to the renter side. So here we'll enter in the rent for a similar dwelling as the one that we're looking at purchasing. So in this case, to get a 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto with pretty large square footage, maybe some outdoor space, you're probably looking at $2,500 minimum, like minimum. But I think I'm going to put in $3,000 here for the rent to make sure we're getting a nice rental unit. Oh, would you look at this? I guess you can actually rent out entire homes, even near in a pretty good location. I think this one's near Christie Pitts for $3,000. So there you go. Then we'll need to input monthly rental insurance, which is generally pretty cheap. Think like $50 is probably reasonable here per month. And then we'll need to account for annual rent increase, which has historically been about 1.5%. And now to finish things off here, we'll need to enter some assumptions about our investments as a renter. This is super important for a renter. That's because the idea is any of the money you save for being a renter relative to a homeowner, you need to invest that money. You need to make that money work for you. And the place that you're probably going to want to invest that money is in the stock market, because that's the next best alternative available to home ownership. So for example, instead of using the down payment money to buy a home, you'd use that chunk of money and invest it in the stock market. But why do you have to do this? Well, it's for a very important reason, and that's because if you did not invest this money, then homeowners would win this comparison for sure. And that's because a homeowner is buying an asset over time. They're buying their home, and that asset is going to become more valuable over time. So you, as a renter, you also need to acquire some type of asset that's going to increase in value over time. So I'm going to put an 8% annual return here in the stock market, as that's within historical norms. And then finally, we'll put in our estimate for inflation here. Long-term inflation targets by central banks is usually around 2%, but we are running a little bit hot right now, so I'm going to bump that up to 3%. And then finally, there's also some tax assumptions about investments. In this case, I'm going to assume that this person is making use of their TFSAs and RRSPs to do the investments. And now, just like magic, as you can see, all of this table is auto-populating, and ta-da! The result is renting actually leaves you with more money, with a higher net worth than buying this home. I don't know about you, but I think that's really interesting. So let me be really clear here. All the things we've considered, even selling your home for over $2 million after you bought it for a little over $1 million, you'd still have less money than a renter who paid $3,000 per month. How is this even possible? Well, let's look at what we're really taking into account here in this table, which summarizes everything. So first of all, buying the home is already setting you back $48,000 because of the closing costs you pay to buy the home. Remember, this is a sunk cost. You get nothing in return for this. And a renter, they have no initial costs. They just move in and then start paying rent. In terms of recurring costs, the renter just pays their rent and their renter's insurance. They also pay utilities, but remember, we're not taking those into account here because they net out to zero against the homeowner. And we're just looking at the homeowner's excess utilities. But for the homeowner, they pay all of these costs here. They pay mortgage interest, they pay property tax, they pay maintenance, insurance, utilities. These are all unrecoverable costs you pay for the home. These are that equivalent of rent that we were talking about before. They're just expenses. But very important to note here, we do not include the mortgage principal in this number. As you can see, 908 here is different from 658. And that's because the mortgage principal is what is buying you the home over time. That is an investment, so we don't include that as an expense. Third, we have investment gains for the renter. So the number you see here includes basically the return on investment you get from investing all of these things here. This is what those investments would yield for you. This is all the return of investing those expenses in the stock market. Because remember, as a renter, you don't have to pay those, so you get to invest that money instead. This ensures we're comparing an equal buyer to an equal renter, and that's very important for this comparison. Because if we were just looking at somebody who could buy a home versus somebody who could not afford to buy a home, well, obviously this person is going to be more financially ahead than this person because they already are starting with more money. So it's very important that for this comparison to make any sense, that we're assuming that you have the same amount of money in both scenarios and that you're either going to use the money to purchase a home or to rent. So as a result, the homeowner does not experience any of these gains in the stock market because they had to pay that money as expenses. And so far, this looks pretty bad for the homeowner. Their costs are way higher than the renter, and the renter has all these investment gains. But of course, there's one more major difference, and that's because the homeowner is buying an asset, the home, whereas the renter is not. So the homeowner is going to capture a nice gain on the sale of their home, which reduces all of these costs that they have to pay. But even with that nice gain on the sale of their home, because of the expenses they've paid relative to the renter, they actually end up with less money when all is said and done. Pretty interesting. But I want to be super crystal clear here. This situation can be drastically different depending on the assumptions that you use. For example, if I put in an appreciation rate here of 10% instead of 5.5, which gives you an ending home value of 3 million, which is a bit wacky, then the homeowner comes out way ahead. So really, what I think this calculator is really meant to do is it's not meant to predict the future, but instead it's meant for you to take some set of assumptions of what the future might look like and then see how things would play out, and then try different assumptions, see how it would play out if the future looked like that instead. And then from there, hopefully it'll be able to guide better decision making for you. But even with everything I've included in this calculator here, there's a lot that goes into making these types of decisions, especially psychological aspects of all of this that I didn't get to talk about in this video. So I would really like to make a part 2 to this, or kind of expand on this topic. So if you like this, please make sure to subscribe and check out a future video that I do on this topic. And before you head out, don't forget to check out the link to my course sale down below if that interests you. And with all that said, thank you and also for regular viewers of the channel, you probably noticed I'm in a completely different place right now. And that's because I'm at my Baba and Dziadziu's, my Polish grandparents on my mom's side. I'm in their wondrous, beautiful place right now. And if you don't know the story about this place, I actually made a video last year, I think, about it. And I'm really proud of it. I think it was a really cool video. So I'll put that up somewhere on the screen and you can check that out. It's a really nice story. And I hope you like it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you later.